Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out the radio version of the show every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern on WDJY 99.1 in Atlanta. We also air on a podcasting network in Los Angeles called the 405 Media. There's a TV version of the show that airs on KMVT 15 in Silicon Valley at 8 p.m. Pacific on Tuesday nights. Both versions of the show air in other states. For these show times, plus past episodes, please visit the show's website at buildingthefutureshow.com. The music for the show is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com. Conscious Company Media's World-Changing Women's Summit, hosted from February 20th to the 22nd at 1440 Multiversity outside of Santa Cruz, California, is a first-of-its-kind gathering for female professionals who work at or are interested in conscious and sustainable businesses. Top female CEOs, entrepreneurs, executives, investors, and thought leaders from around the world will gather for 3 days to connect and share wisdom, insights, and best practices for thriving while changing the world for the better through the power of business. If you're interested in joining or know someone who should attend, go to worldchangingwomensummit.com for more information. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Rick West. He's the CEO and co-founder at Field Agent. Rick, welcome back to the show.
Man, Kevin, as always, it's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back on the show. You and I always have really good conversation. You've been on the TV version, the radio version, and I thought, you know what, let's have Rick back on kind of post-Thanksgiving, but before Christmas, so we can kind of talk about how you kind of look and kind of reflect on maybe the year that's coming up, and kind of how you balance the flow between kind of all that decision making and kind of, I think, at least for me, and it sounds like from yourself, like you almost sometimes get lost in the trenches, whether you're actually building the product or you're, kind of the CEO and everybody kind of in between. It's hard to kind of sometimes think about the successes that you've had throughout the year and kind of looking forward to what you maybe need to focus on in the new year, or even just think about, I think celebrate the successes, because sometimes I even for myself, I think if you're not getting these like huge wins or you're closing these, huge deals every week, you can kind of forget about how good of a year you did have or what you maybe need to work on in the new year. And I know you and I have talked about kind of Field Agent and Jicco a handful of times on the show, but I do kind of want your perspective on the year and whatnot. But maybe before we kind of get into some of that stuff, let's maybe give a quick intro of yourself and Field Agent and Jicco, and then we'll kind of dive into today's topic. Does that sound good?
Fantastic.
Perfect. So
Kevin,
go ahead. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah. So as we've talked before, I try to kind of box us into this little sandbox here that's really associated with capturing data, or in our case, we talk about in the moment information. So we use mobile technology and crowdsourcing to capture data at that point of influence when people are actually using a service or using a product or engaging with something at retail. And so that's really the core of our base. And so as I tell your listeners often as we're talking, I take that machine, and the creativity comes in, which is really to some of the earlier questions we were talking about, is that how do I take that creativity that I had 7-8 years ago when we first launched and continue to use that and to take that passion and to take this machine that we've built and to make it broader than what it is today, so that when people look at us and say, Field Agent, if I want to understand shopper insights inside of a store, they're great, or if I want to check pricing or audit a display, they're fine, but how do I look at them differently? And so we really want people to understand that as we look at different verticals, whether it's mystery shopping or it's something to be associated with, some sort of syndicated data play, we come into play for all those areas. And so it really is just kind of broadening how people look at us, specifically as they look at our machine, which is called this machine of mobile research, mobile data collection, and crowdsourcing.
Sure. No, I think that's really interesting. And for me, you guys have always been really kind of on the cutting edge of leveraging what kind of the new features of the phone. I know we've covered this a handful of times, but what I always thought was really interesting is you guys are very much like, when the iPhone first 3G came out, or was it the 3GS that first launched video? I can't remember because I was jailbroke
Yeah,
my phone.
3S.
Yeah, okay.
It's
So,
3S.
and
Yep.
you guys leveraged kind of recording video and taking photos and stuff like very early on, and turned Field Agent into a kind of a product where people could basically make money from their smartphone by kind of going out to a place and snapping a photo of, I don't know, some sort of what a competitor's doing or a
Sure.
display at a store, and then you guys basically took the same kind of core technology, built a second product called Jicco. And I always love when companies take their core and spin it into another kind of vertical, because obviously the development time is cut way down. So I'm kind of curious to, just so for people that haven't heard of Field Agent or Jicco, to kind of talk about how you used the Field Agent technology to move into another vertical.
Yeah, so let's take this concept of Jicco for us as we listen, as your listeners are tuning in here. Um, Using Field Agent to capture information at retail or inside of someone's home is primarily a project-driven conversation. Hey, I need 1,000 data points or 5,000 data points. Can you capture this over a period of time? And we realized a lot of our clients simply wanted to have a very quick answer to something at retail or to try to understand how someone was using a product. And so we created Jicco, and it's Jicco. So if any of your listeners typed in Go Jicco, they'll be able to play around with the service, and it's primarily a location-based search engine. So you literally can type in anything you'd like to know about something inside of a retail location or inside of a stadium or inside of someone's home, and within 15, 20 minutes, you're going to get customized data coming back for you related to answering a question, capturing a photo, similar to what you would do with Google. Now, it's not instantaneous, but you're not getting data that's 6 months old. You're getting live data coming in. So that was kind of us branching into a vertical. And as your listeners are thinking about what the future holds for us, what I'll tell you is that we are really trying to understand, especially with as I look at my new iPhone 10, and I needed to have that, Kevin, because I'm in technology. I had to have
Interesting.
it.
Yeah, of course,
But
man.
but
Of
as you
course.
but as you look at the 10 and the technology that's in your hand, I think you're going to see some major breakthroughs in the industry as well as some Field Agent around photo recognition and really being able to mine data from photos because of the high resolution that we're able to capture today.
Sure.
More so than we did 4 or 5 years ago, because I can take a picture of a display or take a picture of a shelf. And 5 years ago, it was okay. I mean, it's pretty good images. But today, I mean, I can answer the question about one price on the shelf, but I've also captured another 150 prices simply by having a great photo. And so how do you begin to mine that data so you can create either a syndicated data stream, or for your client, instead of providing an answer to a question, just give them a picture of a display or something along those lines, and let's mine the data and be much more freeform or qualitative in nature. And I think you're going to see that being a major breakthrough over the next year.
No, I 100% agree. And I know like Google even kind of launched that like Google Lens at I/O, which you can basically like take a picture and then it kind of searches. So it's kind of along the same lines, right? And I actually just got like a Google Home the other day and I've been playing with it, or the Google Home Mini,
Okay.
I should say. And just like talking at something is kind of an interesting interface, right? Well, it's not really an interface, but or a way to interact with something. So I think that's kind of interesting. And I think you're right. We're kind of at an interesting point with like photography and being able to really analyze and through AI and stuff. And I'm so curious to see what kind of Google and Apple do, and companies like yourself where you guys leverage, the technology that, obviously these companies put together and put out, right? Because I kind of mentioned earlier, and we've covered in past shows, is you guys are very up on this stuff and you need to be to kind of stay relevant with what's happening in the industry. And I think that's kind of a good segue into today's topic, where you've been at Field Agent for what, almost 8 years now.
Right. Right.
You spun off a product, Jicco, and the curious thing to me, and I think I struggle with this myself, is like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is kind of celebrating the wins of the year, kind of looking forward for what we should kind of do next year. And I think, how do you kind of manage that and kind of motivate your team to say like, look guys, we had a good year. I know we're in kind of a busy month or a couple of months, but like how do we kind of, look forward to the new year and kind of decide, the direction we're going to go, whether we need to change some stuff or keep going down the field? How do you guys kind of manage that? Because you guys are, I wouldn't even really say you guys are a successful company, you're making money now. How do you kind of keep the train moving?
All right, I give you a couple of things.
Sure.
Now, part of this is some of your listeners are going to hear this. You're like, oh, Rick, really? I mean, you're going to go down this path. But I give you a really, really simple thing that we do. And this is based upon a guy in Atlanta, a leadership guy. His name is Andy Stanley.
Okay.
And his push is change creates momentum.
Sure.
So you think of that very, very simply. So I'm going to give you a simple one. Every 3 or 4 months, we have every person, and we have 55 full-time folks, 25 part-time folks in one building.
Wow.
And every 3 months, we make everyone change desk.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Again, now we have kind of, pods and people sitting around all over the place, and couches. I mean, it's a stand-up desk, it's everything. But we have teams of people that sit close to each other, but we force people to change desks. Now, a couple of things happen with that. A, the environment, the change does create momentum. The second thing is, because we don't have massive groups of 100 people on one team, we might have 4 or 5 people sitting next to each other just because they were friends and it made sense to sit next to each other. And through osmosis, you hear things. Well, now I'm taking a couple of people from this account management group and having them sit next to project management. I've got a couple of people over here within design and they sit next to someone in sales. You begin to hear things and see things differently. So just a simple thing like that creates tremendous momentum for our organization. And it's something that doesn't cost any one of your listeners $1.
Sure.
Just move. Just move people around. The second thing that kind of goes on those same lines is that we oftentimes kind of romanticize back in the day when we launched Field Agent and how cool it was and how creative we were and all the things we were doing. And now that we're really, really busy and our heads down, we don't take time, A, to celebrate the wins, but B, to really encourage people to look at something that's different. And so we have a more formalized process. It, again, doesn't cost your organization anything but time. And you've heard Google do something similar, Apple do something similar. But we have a term that's called a passion project.
Okay.
And we said, listen, every person in the organization is encouraged to take on a passion project that's outside of their normal day-to-day work. So, for example, we do a ton of work with our field agents, right? Mm-hmm. So we have, 1 million plus people that's out in the field that conduct work for us. And so someone in our client services organization may say, I'm really interested in how we engage our agents around communication. And they take on a project really trying to figure out how they would change the way we engage agents. Meanwhile, someone in agent services who really focuses on agents every single day, they've got a really interesting project around the way we do things for our sales development team and how we engage our clients via a third-party software we use called HubSpot.
Okay.
And what happens with that is it keeps excitement, change going, but at the same time, remember, you've got really, really smart people that come in that are excited about what they're doing, and then a year later, they're just focused in their silo, and we want to get away from that. So changing desk is really simple, but this thing called a passion project is really, really something your listeners should take on, because that gets people excited. It makes them want to be part of the larger organization. And you know what it's like, Kevin. I mean, if you look at something long enough, eventually you just kind of see the same thing. When you look at it with fresh eyes, it's really, really interesting.
No, I 100% agree. And I think the thing that's interesting too is even just like posting it on maybe like a whiteboard, I found is kind of works in like the lunch area or something, where you post like we had, I don't know, like we're now in X amount of countries because of this month, or we had our biggest quarter ever, or like little things like that maybe somebody that's maybe on the design or development side doesn't really know, right? Like to your point, like if you don't sit next to a sales guy, you don't really know if you closed, well, I guess in your case, it would be like added X amount of, kind of field agents this month, or it could have been your biggest month ever. But like, if nobody knows that, it kind of gets lost, right? And, You know,
Really does.
if I'm just sitting in the corner coding feature A, B, C, D, and etc., I don't really know that, maybe November was the biggest month that a company's ever had. And so just trying to communicate that around is quite interesting.
Right, so that's important. And then we tell people around this time of the year, and again, you think of our clients. So we've got, large retailers are our clients,
Yeah.
Fortune 500 companies, large CPG companies. Well, guess who really, they really, really do not want to talk to you the last week of November and the last 2 weeks of December?
Sure.
Our clients.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's been stressed out all year long, and it's the only downtime they have. But Kevin, these are two of our largest months of the year, so we're cranking through, you know, exponentially high numbers for us in November, December over the course of a 3-week month, and your clients really don't want to talk to you. So what we tell our team is that, when you have downtimes like this, and let's say you're in client services, and there's really no one to engage because no one wants to hear from you, how do you take that time to do really simple things like, kind of clean up your desk, and everyone does that, or clean up your files and play with it. But more importantly, how do you step back a little bit and really begin to look at the new year coming up, not into a kind of a new year resolution or big goals, but really just to look at your business and say, okay, looking at the first quarter of next year, how do I really take this time today to do things a little bit differently? And that's really hard for us to budget in. But
Sure.
we tell our teams that you've got to take the time, because if you don't, you're simply going to keep your head down and you're going to miss things. So we try to make it more formalized. It's difficult because everyone's got a full-time job and everyone's cranking through things. But especially from a leadership standpoint, I continue to reinforce in our team, you've got to take the time to plan, and you've got to take the time to look further out. And if you don't take that time, you're going to reach this burnout thing, and no one's going to be happy, and everyone's just going to spiral. So we continue to reinforce that across our team, whether it's our director of people and culture saying that, whether it's me saying that, or our directors. It's always about, you got to give me your day, right? You've got to focus, deliver the day to day. But at the same time, how do you squeeze in some time to look at the future? And it's really more informal, one-on-one base than the large organization taking a 2-day offsite to go do planning.
Got you. Okay, so I'm curious then, how long do you kind of look into the future when you're talking about this? Because I always thought, just when somebody asked me, they're like, "Oh, where are you going to be in 3 to 5 years?" You're like,
"Oh gosh, really?"
I'm in technology. Like, what do you think? Like, yeah. the cell phone could be dead by then. It could be this crazy holographic thing. It could be, who knows, right? Like, we have no idea what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years, realistically, right? So I think it could be. For me, I don't think necessarily the cell phone's going to be dead, but it could be in a different little bit of a form factor. I know Google tried with glass, or it probably won't be glass, but we have no idea. It's still going to be some sort of thing. We're going to need something physical, obviously, to take a photo. We're going to need something physical to take a video and selfies and all that kind of stuff. But it might look quite different than how it is today. It might look the exact same. We have no idea. So how far do you kind of look out into the future when you're trying to basically see where your tech companies are going to go in the future?
Yeah, we have the luxury of having one of my business partners, Henry Ho. He's also one of the co-founders of the company, and he really is looking strategically for us out, call it 12, 18 months or so.
Okay.
And that's their job, so that our organization isn't spending time saying, gosh, how are we really going to take photo recognition and go take it somewhere? And how are we going to take on Alexa? And what's our version of Alexa going to be? And how's that? I mean, you just can't, because you have so much in front of you. And so they do a really good job of saying, all right, let's vet this out. 30 years ago, everyone, actually 40 years ago, you didn't have a computer on your desk. Therefore, you had this thing called dictation, where you would call into this recorder, and you give the cassette tape to a word processing bank, and then they would type in what you just dictated. Well, guess what we're doing today, Kevin?
Okay.
Voice. Hey, why don't you pick up your phone and say, hey, phone, show me this, and then you're actually doing all this voice recognition, voice to text. Well, that's something we did 40 years ago, but technology wasn't there, but it's really, really simple, right? So you can't get caught up in that. But we've got those guys looking a little bit further out. We tell our team is that you need to really look 3 to 6 months out.
Okay.
Now that's, again, if you're client services, your agent services, your project management, look 3, 6 months out, and be a good student of your clients, because your clients will kind of hint and tell you where they're going as well. Because if we get too far ahead of our clients, they're like, yeah, that's interesting, Rick, but I don't think I could say yes to that. Now, Henry and his organization is looking 12, 18 months out. We work with 2 or 3 of our strategic clients, and we're talking about that really, really interesting, work that we want to do. And we've got these beta tests over here, which is really
Sure.
how Jicco came about.
Sure.
But that day-to-day aspect of things that we're looking at is really about 3 to 6 months out. And that way your entire organization can be a part of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, because for me at least, and I don't know what direction you guys are potentially going, but I think like you mentioned, you got the iPhone 10, and like the augmented reality stuff has to be
Right.
something you guys are looking at, and I could see you guys easily integrating, that into kind of Field Agent and even Jitco, right? I think live being able to see in a location how 3D display or of a model or something or other in a store or wherever could be is really cool for you guys, right? And whether that gets
Yeah.
delivered through, the iPhone or an iPad or some other device with a lens doesn't really matter, right? Like, and so for me, you guys are kind of a hardware software company, even though you guys aren't really necessarily building the hardware, at least at this point, but you could maybe, right? Like that to me is what's fascinating about what you guys are kind of doing.
Well, it goes back to the engine and the machine that you have. When you've got 1.1 million people downloading an app, engaging in technology, and if I look, a couple of 3 years ago and said, well, Google Glasses is going to be, an interesting, approach. Let's take that on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we played with it for a while, but Kevin, it's been 2 or 3 months.
Yep.
San Francisco said, no way.
Yep.
You can't even walk into a restaurant or a bar because it's too weird, and
Yep.
associate wasn't accepted.
Yep.
Well, there is that concept of, failing fast. We said, hey, let's stop work on that. Why on earth we're going to go down this path? Because it doesn't seem like it's going to be accepted unless it's in very rare cases where people log in and they or sign up for some specific use, and that's not something we could scale. But to your point, you have to play with it. You can't you can't ignore it, but at the same time, you've got to put your kind of your puts and calls. You've got to bet on where your things are things are going to go, and that's where I really think the image recognition piece is going to be taken off for us. And obviously the piece on voice, you've seen it with Alexa and other things. Those are 2 areas that we have to better understand, because that's where technology is going, and it's had tremendous user or everyday consumer acceptance. And when you get those two, putting those 2 things together, that means it's going to have some life to it. And so we have to be aligned with that, and we have to better understand how we're going to use it.
Sure. And the interesting thing too is you brought it up a few minutes ago about basically that there's certain clients, like even big name clients, that are willing to beta test things, and others that just aren't there yet. And that's fine, and I don't mean that mean. It's just it's nice that you guys have the ability to go to maybe 2 or 3 clients and say, we're playing with this thing that works with this thing, and it might be the future, might not be the future, but we want to work with you to kind of see how it plays into your organization or not play in your organization, and kind of decide, do we want to potentially roll this out to other beta partners or into the product, or just kill it off like Google killed off Glass, right?
Yeah, well, if you think, again, even as little as 2, 3 years ago, if you look at the large enterprise type clients, they're having conversations around RFID.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What's the chip mean? Then you've got an entire group of people saying, gosh, iBeacons are the way to go. We're going to change everything.
Yeah, I
so
remember that.
as a technology company, or in their case, a tech-enabled company, we have to do the groundwork where you go work with a major retailer, you work with a major manufacturer, we go purchase the iBeacons, and we go put them in stores, and we manually go do these. I mean, you have to be able to go do that. And then finally people say, practically, I don't think that's something we're going to take on.
Sure.
So you can't not do it.
Yeah.
We have to play with it. And every now and then one of those will take. And now who's to say where iBeacons are going to end up? Who's to say where RFID is going to come in? So you have to be a part of that conversation. But which goes back to my earlier comment, I can't have 55 people in my organization worried about this thing called iBeacon and RFID.
Sure.
I've got a couple of folks that are trying to understand what it means and where we can go, because it's just way too distracting.
No, that's actually a really good point. And the other thing, I want to go down that a little bit more, but one other point I was going to make to that is the thing that's interesting is I remember like QR codes. Everybody said it was going to
Yeah.
be like the next big thing, and it really never caught on in North America for the most part. Other than maybe on some tickets and whatnot, but it used to but like in parts of Asia, apparently, it was on like everything, like every
Yeah.
poster, so like in that part of the world, that was huge. In North America, it wasn't. But like if your guys didn't play with the technology, just because it didn't connect or catch on in America, doesn't mean it didn't catch on in another part of the world. And you guys have stuff all over the place, so you kind of need to know just because it doesn't catch on in a part of the world, it might catch on in another part of the world, and you might need to roll out something to a certain part of the world that doesn't exist in another part of the world. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
So let's take that conversation. And there was a day that was prior to apps.
Mm-hmm.
The question was, do you build or do you buy?
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you build it internally or do you buy it from somewhere else? Well, today it's, do you build, do you buy, or do you download?
Yeah, interesting.
So let's use that whole QR code conversation. We could spend the next 6 months trying to develop the most unbelievable QR code reader known to mankind,
Mm-hmm.
or we can just download a third party's SDK that's what they do for a living,
Sure.
put that into your app and move forward and not overthink it. So
Sure.
so it is a very interesting world for us when you get into some of the technologies you're talking about. You don't have to be the one that creates it, but you do have to be the organization that understands the work processes,
Interesting.
the
Yeah.
pre and post information. Just because you can scan something doesn't mean you can process it, doesn't mean you can capture it the right way. So all that's on us, but we don't have to go out and try to figure out the software and the hardware required to go do that, because an iPhone or an Android phone with a really good barcode scanning SDK that's dropped right into your app, you can scan anything globally. And from a character standpoint, I can do the same thing in China tomorrow.
Sure.
So that's been really, really interesting when you think from a technology standpoint, because of that build, buy, download mentality. Some things we want to build because it's proprietary, and Kevin, we can win with that. Some things we want to buy because it makes sense, because we want to hold on to it, and we can really, kind of run with that. But for a lot of things in technology today, especially with freeware and the code that's out there today, downloading makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's actually really good point. And there's even a lot of open source stuff that maybe you're
Yeah.
like, we'll buy, maybe we'll buy a version, or maybe we'll try an open source product or like piece to put into our software, and then if people are using it or it doesn't meet our needs going forward, you can swap it out, right? And then just update
Absolutely.
the app, right? Which is always kind of fascinating to me. So, but you brought up something kind of earlier about you have a few guys kind of worrying about the up and coming stuff and playing with that, and kind of keeping your companies relevant. But that's not everybody's problem at the company. And so how do you kind of keep the people that aren't really necessarily worried about the future kind of thinking about what do you get them thinking about?
Well, it's building up on the base. I mean,
Okay.
we talk about this all the time, is that we've got this amazing base. So again, let's say that you're in account management,
Okay.
and we've got this amazing base of clients, and we're doing really, really good work. So I would rather them focus on, hey, here's the work we've done with our clients. How do you engage the clients and take that either broader, horizontally across that organization, or how do I take that vertically and go deeper and gather more information, as opposed to trying to come up with the next widget?
Okay. Interesting.
Because if I don't, then I'm going to miss tremendous opportunities along those lines. The same way with our agents, right? How do I really want to have my agent services organization trying to figure out something fun to do with our agents, or really looking at, here's the feedback we're getting, here's what we could do different, and let's really go broader and deeper around ethnicities, how we engage. Some people are visual learners. What does that mean? All those things are within our wheelhouse to expand our base. And it's not someone in agent services saying, wow, this will be a really cool thing we could do with voice recognition, blah, blah, blah. It's just too distracting. But at the same time, when we talked about those passion projects, someone may want to take that on and say, hey, here's my project. and I really want to go focus on this. And so we give them complete autonomy, but it's not core to what they have to do.
I see. That's interesting. So when you say these passion projects, do they get time throughout their week? Are they kind of expected to do it on their own time? A bit of both? How does that kind of work?
Primarily throughout the week, and the
Okay.
team supportive because everyone does their own thing. And the only thing we require is that they be able to present back to the organization that they're doing the work for, if you will,
Okay.
and also kind of, we'll call it management, if you will, but they get in front of the owners and really say, here's what I'm passionate about, this is what it looks like, and it's our responsibility to get back to them and say, this is what we can, and what is what we can do, here's what we're going to take from that. And so it's pretty exciting because you know what it's like, you get so tunnel,
Yeah.
focused on the things in front of you, and it's hard to break free. So if that's part of the culture, and again, you hear it from Apple and Google and others saying the same thing, but if that's part of your culture, then people will support it because they're going to do the same thing, and you're going to support them when they're off working on their project.
Sure. No, I think that's really good advice. And I think for the most part, like all the different verticals inside of a company kind of have their downtime throughout a year. It might be a little bit
Right.
trickier with maybe like developers or maybe customer support, but like you could easily say, okay, you go do this for a few weeks, you do go do this for a few weeks, right? Even throughout the year, right? Because there's always bugs or there's always new features or whatnot to be added. But I'm kind of curious to know, how do you guys kind of manage that queue? Because I'm sure you get feature requests. Some are probably good. Some are probably like, yeah, that'd be maybe nice to have someday. And then you probably get the, if it hoverboarded me to work type feature requests. I
Yeah.
would,
Right.
like, how do you kind of decide what actually makes it into a future version of a product?
Yeah, so I think it goes back to that 3 6 months, type of time frame. And so if you look out, a good development team will tell you that there are always going to be a list.
Sure,
And the
exactly.
reason you have lists is because of the 100 ideas, you have to force the good ones to the top of the list.
Sure.
And so you're always going to have that list. Everyone's frustrated with the list, but it's there. But we do a little bit of back and forth. I mean, we can be operations focused
Okay.
and really trying to focus on getting efficiencies. And we might take it's not really a sprint, but we might take a season, a couple of 3 months, and really, really work on internal things. So our organization's pretty happy because the dev team's showing some love.
Okay.
And then there are times that the strategy teams comes in and says, "Hey, here are 3 interesting ideas. We need some time to build us a working model of this so we can go play with it." So we kind of ebb and flow, and then in
Okay.
between that, you've got emergencies and things that our clients are asking us to do. So uh, the real client requests are always going to get priority,
Sure.
and then you kind of bounce back and forth between efficiency type things as well as kind of building the future out there. And there's a pretty good ebb and flow. It's not a real formal process, but when you sit down with your directors and you kind of talk about what's important, the team can get behind to that. But you can't spend 9 months a year focused on really fun things and let your organization drown. That'll never work. So you have to ebb and flow between those.
Sure. So I'm assuming you guys are kind of a agile development company. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair.
Okay. The one question I have about that is because, and I'll tell you right now, I think agile is, I'm a huge fan of agile, but I think not every week or not every sprint necessarily needs to be an agile sprint. Like there's times
Right,
where you
right.
literally need to pull in, and I don't know, it's hypothetical, but like you need somebody from like the design side, or maybe multiple people from the design side, the development side, maybe the business side, and maybe customer support or a handful of other kind of verticals. And you literally need to get in a boardroom or a room and kind of not argue, but discuss kind of like, okay, I think we should maybe build in this feature because of this, this, and this, and you're all in the same room and you're kind of deciding, where that doesn't really fall into a sprint. And I think like the funny thing is, and tell me your experience with this, is a company that's moving into becoming an agile company thinks that every week that their team's working needs to be in some sort of sprint or agile thing. And I think for me, that's never been the case. There's been times where
No.
it might be like months of sprints, and then you might need like a month or two off of being, or certain teams in sprints. because you're reworking or you're figuring out something. Have you guys kind of found that? I'm always kind of curious about that.
Yeah, it is. So let's use Jicco as an example. You can imagine when we were going down this path, and you said, and we'll call it a sprint for the sake of arguing right now. But
Okay.
listen, I just needed MVP. I just need something I can play with.
Sure.
And then once you play with it, you realize, oh my gosh, this has some legs in it. Then to your point, you've got to sit down with all the right people involved, kind of a cross-functional group, and you've got to sit down, look at a whiteboard, and you really have to plan this thing out to the point that it becomes a project, and it might take 6-8 weeks of focus on this project because you've made sense to made the decision to go do that. Let's use a dashboard as an example. You might have a client request for a dashboard feature, and you could sprint real quick to get something put in, but someone says, in order for us to really make this worthwhile, we really should relook at the dashboard. And by doing so, it might take 1 or 2 year developers 6 to 8 weeks to really kind of do some redesign work. And so we have to pace ourselves and be able to step back, because no one can live in that burnout mode of sprinting all the time. It's just not efficient, and I don't think you're going to get great work out of it.
No, I 100% agree. And I just like, sometimes I just in my past, I've seen companies or startups where they just like, we need to be agile all the time, every week. And it's like, no, you really don't. And it's nice to see that you guys are doing kind of the same thing. And also, it's easy for me to just say that, but actually have people like yourself that are openly saying like, no, our organization, or at least parts of our organization, sometimes aren't always doing that because they're doing something for 6 or 8 weeks, like building a new dashboard, for example. I think that's actually really good advice.
You have to. It's like all things in life, Kevin. You have to have some balance, right? If not, you'll just find this whole burnout thing. So you have to have the balance between everything's important right now, or everything has this tremendous speed, as opposed to sit back a little bit and let's really be thoughtful and think through it. And if you have a good mix of that, I think you'll have a much better product long term.
Sure. So we've kind of covered this a handful, it's kind of come up throughout our conversation today about burnout. And how do you kind of make sure that people on your team or yourself or kind of upper management don't burn out?
Well, yeah, we have a Monday morning meeting each week in our organization where we spend time walking people through things, and then we also have a monthly fireside chat. And the last fireside chat that I have is total team comes in, just really focused on burnout and what it means, and primarily looking at it to say that burnout doesn't mean that you've kind of gone off the deep end. You've got to go visit a psychologist or psychiatrist because it's gone crazy. It really is. You're just done. I mean, you're exhausted mentally, physically. And what we tell people is that it's not often that if you're burnt out at work that you're going to notice it from a work standpoint, but you're going to notice it in relationships.
Okay, sure.
Okay, you're going to notice it in your health. You're going to notice it in all these other areas. So part of what we do is try to encourage people to kind of hold each other accountable and really to kind of self-assess and like, all right, am I really kind of burn out my relationships and these other areas? And is that the cause, or is work causing that? Or do I have this personal scenario that's real? I'm just burnt out at home. I've got a new baby. Things are kind of, going through things. And we tell people, listen, anything can happen for a season, because you know what? The baby goes through colic, you're going to be okay. Or this major issue with the system, we can't find this bug, and you're going to have a week or so. But if you're constantly dealing with this kind of hamster wheel of burnout all the time, you can't keep going down that path. And so our director of people and culture does a great job of meeting with our team to kind of do self-assessment of one-on-one with those team members.
Okay.
Listen, Kevin, you and I are both smart enough to when you start to see it and you ask the right kind of questions without being insulting.
Sure.
And also give people permission to say, you know what, I just need some time.
Okay.
I've just reached this melting point, because you need people for the long term, and just having people burn out and kind of crashing is not a good thing. And everyone thinks that when you're 23 you can go do that, but it's everything for a season. So we talk about it. We let people know that it's okay to engage about it, and you make people aware, and that's really all you can do. And then with that creates great conversation.
Sure. No, I think that's really good. And so I think you have a whole person dedicated to kind of the team, and what was their title? Culture and
Director of People and Culture.
People and Culture. So what exactly is kind of their day-to-day role in the organization? Obviously, like, probably sounds pretty obvious, but there's got to be things that they do that even somebody like myself wouldn't think of kind of right off the bat, that they kind of is part of their day-to-day responsibilities.
Yeah. So I'll take you back to the olden days when I used to work for P&G.
Okay.
So worked for Procter, and you had this formal work and development plan annual review process. And most people that have worked for large entities understand that annual review process, where
Okay.
you get together once a year and no one's told you anything, and you walk into this review and people just, blah, here's all these bad things you've done over the last year. You're like, you're kidding. No one ever told me this. And everyone's frustrated with the review process, and you kind of move on.
Sure.
And so what we wanted to do is to make sure that it wasn't this similar kind of setup. So one example of what, her name is Christy Dake. One thing that Christy does day in and day out is that she ensures that she has one-on-one time, at least quarterly, if not more than that, with individuals, just to have kind of a health check.
Okay.
Not a review process, just a health check, so that they're not worried, oh gosh, I have to talk to my manager today. I can't let them know what I'm really thinking. No, you can talk to the director of people because she's really focused on you, and she's not going to be, necessarily judging you or worried about your work productivity, what's happening over here. So it really provides kind of a safe place for her to engage. Then what happens from my perspective is that she comes back to the management team and say, hey, I've talked to all 55 people over the last 6-8 weeks. Here's kind of a theme or a tone that I've seen over here and here.
Interesting.
And we can make some changes left or right a little bit without worrying about individuals and being able to hit that. Now, their direct reports, the direct managers still manage the business and manage all the things that are associated with that. But when it really relates to how are you doing, how are you progressing, what do you think about the culture, what do you think about your role, about teammates that are here, what do you think about the party we had last week? Those are all the things that this person does, and that really is one of the pieces of their full-time role, is to really assess the culture, and you assess the culture as it relates to people. And it's just been invaluable to us. But because as the CEO of the company, the owner, you can imagine if I tried to do 55 one-on-ones, I'd hear something completely different than she's going to hear. And she's going to hear probably things closer to truth.
Sure.
And she's got that ongoing relationship. So now over the course of the year, she's probably going to have anywhere from 6 to 8 really, really meaningful conversations with every individual. And that's a really important role to have.
No, I agree. I think that's great. So I'm curious, though, at what size was your team when you brought her on board to kind of handle that?
We hit about 40 people in that range. Now, she was doing other operational type work for us, and HR reports into her. So we've got an HR manager that does some things that's much more on the legal side and that sort of things. But she really is the person that has her hand on the pulse of the organization. She was also, our very first employee.
Oh, interesting.
And so she has worked every job. She's lived it. She's basically either recruited or hired every person we brought in the organization. So she was the perfect person to take this on because she has a direct relationship with every individual, and there's that trust factor that's there. And it was kind of a natural progression for us. I mean, we've seen this in other organizations that when you get around 50, 60 people or so, and you look at spans of chain of command, you need someone that can really have their hand on the pulse of the organization, or you could run into that burnout thing we talked about, or culturally you start to see it. To the point, Kevin, that think about our retention rate or our, I'll bet we are at 5% or so.
Oh, wow. That's actually really good.
Of a true regrettable loss. And most people that leave us are going on to great assignments that we wish them well, and we encourage them because, of the environment we're in. So that tells us that it's working because we don't have 10, 20% of our organization leaving all the time.
Sure.
We've got folks that are staying, and we've got a pretty healthy culture because of it. It's not because of me. It's really because of her.
Interesting. Well, and I think for people that haven't kind of heard of Field Agent or Jicco, you guys are in Fayetteville, Arkansas, correct?
Silicon Valley. I mean, we're in retail Silicon Valley.
Okay. But
messing with
No.
We live in this ecosystem of Walmart with about 1,200 supplier teams working with Walmart, and that's the ecosystem we live in.
Interesting. But well, I guess the point I'm trying to get across that is like you guys aren't in the valley and you're doing kind of these modern business is kind of a weird way of putting it, but like you guys aren't in the valley and you're still doing these kind of things that you potentially only really read about in the valley, right? And I think that in
Right.
itself is inspiring. You know that, and do you find though that kind of people younger and kind of older have kind of adopted this, you know, obviously having a person that cares about how their health and well-being is outside of kind of their direct report and manager, has that been well kind of received from kind of everybody in different age ranges and kind of, you know, from millennials to Gen Xers, etc.? Has that been kind of well received from everybody across the company? Because it seems like it has, but is
Well, it has, but Kevin, because it's genuine.
okay,
See,
interesting, yeah.
it's not like this. Hey, we're going to put in this structure, and you only can go talk to so and so.
I see.
This is a person that genuinely cares about you. They helped recruit you. They helped bring you on. You know, this person's involved in everything from birthday parties here to outside functions to Christmas parties. I mean, this is the person that people see as that kind of go-to
Sure.
person. And when you have really hard employee conversations that we have,
Hmm.
this person's sitting there as well. I mean, so they are that go-to person. Now,
Okay.
this person's not the person that's going to tell you what's going on with your daily work. They're not. There's not the person that's going to recommend that you get promoted here or there. That's what the business does.
Okay.
But this person is intimately involved with you as the person. So if you're a millennial looking at this, you're like, this is just great. Now we have, you know, you could talk about mentors and how you work through that, but you know, we're not sitting at 500 people with all these people that need to have mentors. But here's a person that can come in to help you kind of work through things, and so it solves a lot of problems for us.
Sure. Well, and it also has to help that people in the company can see that you, as the CEO and founder, basically buy into this, right? It's not
Right.
like you just put this person in this role and you could care less what happens, right? Like you legitimately believe in this person and what they're doing. And especially if, you know, you promoted her from being kind of the first employee into this role. And to your point a second ago, when they sit in and kind of reviews and, you know, maybe some of the good and talk bad talks that need to happen throughout the year. Bad's kind of the wrong word, but like constructive criticism,
That's right.
you know, kind of talks is makes sense, right? Because people need to see that, right? And I think even to your point early on the show about you getting the latest iPhone, I know people are like, oh, of course the CEO has it, but like you're playing with the new technology yourself. I think that's what people need to take from that, right? And you yourself are staying current, and you know you're kind of adopting the company and growing the company and adding people in roles to make your company successful and kind of make it into this modern company outside of the valley. And that's partly why I really like having you on the show.
Well, I appreciate that. And then as we talked to one of the earlier shows, is that, you know, for the listeners that are tuning into this, um, if you are in the process of solving a problem and you can use technology to solve that problem, it really doesn't matter where you're located. You can find really smart people that want to jump on board and follow that passion and to go follow that solution.
I
Just because you come up with an interesting idea you think is kind of fun isn't going to get the talent that you're looking for. You really have to be solving something, and people can get behind that. And then the second thing, as we talked before, is that just because you're solving a problem makes sense. You know, you've got to let people think that they're a part of something bigger than they are,
Sure.
bigger than themselves, if you will. And that's why it's so important for these solutions and the things that people are working for, that they can see how it's going to impact the world, how it's going to impact, you know, other organizations, and people can get behind to that. You throw those two things together and you're a halfway decent person, man, you can create something anywhere.
No, I 100% agree. And I think that's really good advice. But we are coming to the end of the show, but I have one more question I want to know about. Do you guys have any remote employees or allow people to work offsite, or does everybody have to be kind of in the office?
We do. We've got let's see, we've got 3 salespeople that are out in the field, which would make sense along
Yep.
those lines. And we've got a couple of folks that don't necessarily work remote, but they actually can work from home time to time. So we've got a pretty
Okay.
flexible work environment here where, hey, one person might have a 40-minute commute, and the other person has 10. The person with 40-minute commute may say, listen, I've got a lot to do today, and it's just another hour and a half, and so I'm just going to stay at home today. So we're pretty flexible along those lines. But in general, we expect people to kind of have some basic office hours, whether they're working at home or outside of that. and that's kind of how it plays out. And then obviously the other countries we have are fairly, fairly remote as well.
Sure.
So I'd love to say that, we've got a structure to that, but we try to be as need-based as we can be to be realistic with what people have from a personal needs standpoint. But we've also got a great environment here, so people like coming in. Hey, we've got a ping pong table and a foosball table, so who wouldn't want to come to work?
Sure, I don't blame them.
Come on.
So, Rick, we're coming to the end of the show, so maybe before you kind of give where people can get more information about you guys, maybe give a quick overview about kind of Field Agent and Jicco for anybody kind of tuning in a bit later or hasn't really heard of either product, because I know we've kind of talked about it throughout the show, but maybe give kind of a quick overview of both products and then where people can get more information about both.
Sure. So Field Agent, when you think of our world, we're changing the way people collect information. Information comes to us in three big buckets. There's an audit type of information that we're going to get, which is pricing, display compliance, things like that. We also do some basic research, which is research and insights. We've got over 1.1 million people in the U.S. alone that have downloaded the app that can provide you insights. And we also do some mystery shopping work where we're capturing information while people are using or engaging products. So that's kind of this big bucket of work that we do. And there's really no piece of data, whether it's out in the public or at someone's home, that if you've got a question regarding, we can't gain access to. So that's Field Agent. What Jicco comes in and plays in is that there are times you're saying, I don't need 1,000 data points. I don't have to be statistically relevant. I just kind of want a qualitative approach. I just want a couple of real quick answers related to what the dairy section at Lidl looks like, or tell me what the frozen food section looks like at Whole Foods. Or can you show me how you store your golf clubs in your garage? Because I'm trying to come up with a really interesting new widget on how people store things in their garage. Those are things that Jicco can do that will allow you within about 15, 20 minutes to get photos and information from everyday shoppers or consumers so that you can actually process that information and have answers to questions that you really need access to in a very timely manner. So that's kind of our world. And so I tell your users that we're very DIY friendly, so you can log on to fieldagent.net, swipe your credit card, and for a few dollars, you can capture information from virtually any location around the U.S. or 6 other countries. And if you want to go to Jicco, it's a simple subscription model where you can sign up, and we're going to be your location-based Google for you. So you can do that too. It's really, really straightforward.
Perfect, Rick. Well, again, I really appreciate you taking the time of your day to be on the show, and look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Listen, I appreciate it. We don't talk before the Christmas and New Year's, man. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Yeah, you as well, man. And we should probably, schedule another one sometime in the new year. I'm curious to know what you guys actually execute on in the new year and kind of where you take both products.
I look forward to it. Thanks much.
Thanks, man. Okay, later. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for listening. Please visit the show's website at buildingthefutureshow.com. Also check us out on Facebook at Building the Future Show and follow us on Twitter at Building Show. The music for the show is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.